Right.
There we go. So can I have a thumbs up from somebody just to demonstrate? Yeah, is that visible to people? Yeah, good. Okay, that's fine. So really critical for me, by the way, this is a really critical, they're all critical conversations, but sometimes, you know, I think organizations can set up resource groups, which are all fine and dandy, but don't necessarily get everybody who's influential within the organization focused and putting their shoulder to the wheel in terms of making sure these outcomes take place. So I think understanding leadership and its role is really critically important. Hence the topic that we've got today. I'll let Angela introduce herself and take on the first section. But before that, I'll just say that from my perspective, my interest is, well, just from a human point of view, it's the right thing to be doing. So I'm always just interested in diversity and inclusion. I've done a lot of work over the years on change management and also experience management lately. And actually have been doing some of the work collaboratively with Angela, again, in some of the D&I projects that she's been involved in, particularly helping to sort of craft some of the frameworks and some of the thoughts around that and some of the basic research. So that's a overview and introduction to myself. Angela will also get herself introduced and then take us through that first section. So, Ange, when you're ready, thank you.
Lovely. Afternoon, everyone, or happy lunchtime. Thanks for joining us. I'm in Milton Keynes. So I'm a board trustee at Warwick SU. It's a volunteer role, giving back to a uni that I came from. And alongside being a consultant and leadership work and a parent, I really am passionate about EDI and inclusion, and mainly because I've had a lot of good things happen to me because of it, and I can see that there's so much more that we can do to create a win-win space for folks. So delighted to be taking this topic forward with you today. Thanks, Mart. So as always, we like to set a bit of context because we're all coming from different spaces and different organisations and different points in our journey. I'm just setting out my context here about equality and equity, which is one we did mention last week, but I do feel the topic of equality sounds familiar to many folk in society and in the workplace, whilst the topic of equity is an emerging theme. So whilst equality is about treating everyone the same and equal, you know, this is what everyone says, this is important, we've got to all have equal opportunities and equal pay and equal this. However, treating everyone the same isn't always appropriate or fair or useful if you're starting from a different place. And as we have with our bites here, we've got different types of bites, people on starting the journey from different viewpoints. Equity, and in the UK, we are emerging in talking about equity, whereas I'd say from, I don't know, Aaron says he's lost me. I'm still here, so I hope I'm not sure what I've done to, can everyone else hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so hopefully Aaron will get sorted out soon. Equity is about resourcing, thank you, Aaron, is about resourcing the less privileged so they're able to start from the same place. So I did a lot of projects in the 90s and the noughties, going out to parts of the UK, bringing long-term unemployed people into the workspace, running programs just to get them back into the groove. What does it take to show up at work each day? What do you need to be doing, thinking, dressing and being? So equity is making sure that everyone can participate there. And next,
sure.
Yeah,
hold on, there we go.
Wonderful. What is great about today is the people who's got the gift of making equity happen, very much so, is the leadership. Those of us who influence our colleagues or run programs or run teams or are part of D&I champions or parts of committees, advisory groups, resource groups, we have the opportunity to help shape the equity part of the equation to make sure we're there. So as they say, equality is about being invited to a dance, equity is making sure everyone can enjoy the dance and participate. We've all got the right frocks and we know the right steps. So as in all organisational transformation, and this is one of the things when we're talking about EDI, that it is a transformation shift. It is a journey that organisations are on. Having our leadership engaged right from the outset is so vital. It's not just about saying, here's our statement of intent, this is our new direction, we want to see it happen. It's also about all of us personally getting involved and sharing our journey, our lived experience. So it's about awareness, self-awareness, personal growth, and as always, modeling the new behaviors. You know, if we are saying this is new, this is important, this is what we want to be doing now, we want to be more inclusive, then we need to give the airtime to the conversation. We need to show up, set tone for what's acceptable or non-acceptable behavior, and just keep going, because we need to keep empowering people to feel that this is a journey, this is the way we are going to show up, and this is what our brand means for our members or our customers or our students or our patients, whatever your community is serving, we are role modeling what we want all our colleagues to be doing. So success, equity, diversity and inclusion is as much a personal journey as well as an organisational one. And so today we're really going to take the twin approach, that how are you showing up on the journey, where are you in your personal experience of that, versus what do we need to do as an organisation? What are the systems, processes and structures? So we're going to give you practicalities on both, which I love. And the main thing, as I always say to folk, that, you know, yes, you're up for it. Great, you've got a plan. Now you've got to really activate your motivation. Now you've got to be willing to be vocal, be very clear and be demanding. It's a long game, but also be useful with practical advice. And whether it's a 5-minute conversation with someone, pulling someone with some feedback, or showing up as a mentor, there's so many practical ways in which you can role model those behaviours.
So the point I think to make about this is that if you are an executive, you're probably signing off your diversity and inclusion strategy amongst many other strategies that you have to be running in organizations. I think the point that we're making here is it's one of those strategies that you can't just sign off and forget. It's also not one that you can go, well, do you know what, this doesn't apply to me because I'm not disadvantaged. I'm not in the target of what we think we want to be focused on, and therefore I just don't need to be involved at all. The fact of the matter is that the way in which we come to work, the way in which we interact with our colleagues, the way in which we think and talk and act is very much what keeps the way, the current modus operandi, the current way of working stuck, if you wish. And therefore, personal engagement, personal growth, personal change is absolutely important. Having made that point about leadership, it should therefore be one in which you have got all sorts of learning opportunities, discussion opportunities for those leaders to be able to get involved and understand what role they play. Then there's two components to it. One is a strategic one. And the image we've got here, we don't need to dwell a great deal on this, but it's, I think, a useful one to say that what we're really talking about here is identity, someone's identity, and allowing people to be who they want to be. And the way in which we understand identity, again, from a leadership perspective, is important to understand some of the components that go into that and some of the complexities that go up into the diversity of how human beings show up and what influences their sense of identity. And again, this is quite a useful way of talking about it. It's maybe a sort of a map that you might want to work on yourself which is thinking about some of the primary obvious things that inform who we see ourselves as. And again, these are ones which are often foremost within a typical program, things to do with gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, race, etc. And then there are other influences on that. For example, my educational background, my religious context, where I am, you know, how I work, where I am in my life in terms of, you know, other people around of me, my own social network, you know, my age group, all of those are influences on that. And then again, you know, the influence that the organization has upon me in terms of, you know, where I am in the organization as a role, how long I've been around, what my experience is, what my network of people are, and indeed the particular part of the organization that I'm actually sitting in. And then again, even more broad than that, there are cultural influences around of how I see things like power and authority, you know, and how I approach work as being something which is essentially all about competing or collaborating, how I like to get things resolved in terms of issues and conflicts. And again, things that are particular to me, all of this adds up to my identity. And I think it's worth, again, trying to understand some of the subtleties of that from the leadership perspective, because, you know, there are many, many ingredients that influence and construct someone's identity at the end of the day. And if there is a central message to all of this, it is trying to increase the tolerance that we have organizationally and individually to allowing somebody to be fully who they are. Because again, going back to the conversation we had last week, the driver of all of this is that people who are able to come and show up within a work context, being who they are, offer much more if they're allowed to be different and to be themselves. So with that all said, let's look at the strategic component of leadership. And I think it naturally follows from what I've just said that this is complex in the sense that you're not going to have a single strand of activity that is going to change things and move things forward. And anybody who's got any background in change management knows, again, that change tends to happen through weaving together different approaches and creating a momentum that affects things simultaneously in different ways. And indeed, if we recognize that the greatest challenge we've got organizationally is the habit, the systemic things exist behaviorally within the system of the way that we organize things. And that's what we're really trying to address. And therefore, we need to tackle this problem simultaneously on different levels. And I don't know that this is necessarily the only way of thinking of it, but when I first came across this, you know, it spoke to me about the fact that it has to be a 360-degree approach. This is actually a great piece of work from a lady called Rebecca Steele. Again, she's pretty well known in the States for her thinking around this. And if you are at this point in time particularly focused on the strategic element of how do you construct a program, I think that she's done some really excellent thinking and work and examples that she's got in terms of how you have this 360-degree approach. So that's one thing I would, you know, commend that you think about in terms of how you put together an effective program. Now, bringing that together in terms of practicalities, how do people connect to that plan? Well, they connect to things when we suggest that there is a journey, when we suggest that there is a North Star, there's a vision to be had. And this actually is the result of some work that Angela was directly involved in, and I was indirectly working on with her in the background. And this is work which is now published and relates to unions here within the UK. Prospect itself is the largest union within the UK, and Bectu is a subsidiary one which was brought in as part of that larger family, which is particularly focused upon the what was it, Angela?
The entertainment industry.
Entertainment industry, yes,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the thing that was particularly pleasing really was in terms of working with them on that was to produce a vision that wasn't mealy-mouthed. It was ambitious. It really did tackle the central aspects of systemic discrimination head on and was unequivocal in terms of stating what the ambition was. Now, getting to that outcome is another matter, but producing a vision which is quite clear and hopefully inspiring for people was the aim of this particular communication. And again, it's talking quite clearly about getting rid of, the causes of inequality at work, and then looking at the other side of that, of the reinvention of how we are as an organization, however, doing that on the basis of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And interestingly, just for a little bit more context here, Prospect itself obviously can look at themselves as an organization, but in particular, it fits very strongly into their core remit of working with other organizations through their own membership, obviously because they are a union. And so when they're talking about this, they're talking about a very, very ambitious capability of supporting all of the associated membership organizations, if you want, by implication, to also go through this transformation at the end of the day. Hence, talking about partnering with others to remove and also engaging with our industry sectors. So I think one thing that characterizes a plan that seems to have real intent is to make sure that your vision, your North Star, is clear, it's ambitious, it's unequivocal, and hopefully for the people that it's meant to be speaking to, it is an encouraging sign the organization gets it. So that's one core component. Then you've got the business of getting there. And again, I think one thing, and this is more generally something that applies to any form of transformation, when you sit down and you consult and you listen to people, either in terms of interviews, surveys, whatever it is, you start to really generate a tremendous amount of desire, insight, needs and wishes from people in terms of what they would like to see. And again, your own experience tells you that some of those things are, immediate opportunities that can be capitalized on, and some things are going to take much longer. And as a result of that, you end up with a lot of stuff on the table, if you want, in terms of desires. And there are various ways in which to prioritize and organize that. And for me, I always think it's important when you've listened to people to be able to honor the process of listening and acknowledging that you have listened to them fully. Also being truthful about saying certain things aren't going to happen immediately, and certain things require us to build foundations, require us to be on a journey and on a point of evolution, and that there is a definite sense of logic that you've got to get certain dependencies in place before other things can take place. Hence, this is an idea around of a map. And we've used this approach, to basically talk about how you remove some of those situations of inequality, and then how you start to, reinvent the organization. And this is, again, something that I would encourage, the notion of having a number of phases of development. We've called it, in this particular case, everything from foundation up to leading. And again, we've divided it out into a number of key areas. And all of this is based upon a listening program, understanding what people want to see, and just making sure that we've prioritized it in a kind of a logical way. And by the way, these maps then are very powerful because they allow people to communicate intent, understand what needs to happen, and again, show people that there is some real substance behind that North Star, again, that we've done the detailed thinking around of that. So in our particular version here, we've divided it into behavior, into governance, and also finally into achievement, as 3 areas. I don't think those are the only ways of thinking about it. That's the particular thing. The overall thing that I'm saying here is that an evolutionary map, carefully thought through, clearly communicated, is an excellent way in which to frame what is undoubtedly a 3-year plus journey. As we well know, this is a program that takes a considerable amount of time. And by the way, once you've got this in place, have the courage to keep iterating and updating it year on year, but it's an excellent way to get yourself up and running, and again, clarify for people in a very practical way what you're up to. So
can I add here,
please,
Martin, if you
yes,
just
please.
What was exciting for Prospect Union is they had so many different types of teams, and industrial sectors, as many of us do, have different teams, different focuses, who are at different places in their journey. And it allowed local teams to literally go, oh, I'm on foundation level for this behavior. Oh, we're a bit further up here on aspiring. Yeah, we just about fit one of these sustainables. And crikey, there's nothing here on leading yet. And what we're looking to do is to provide people with a framework that they can then plot where they are on the journey, and then map out where they want to go to next. So it wasn't so rigid to say everyone must be doing all the same things at the same time. It gave local leaders, local teams, employee resource groups. It's almost like an MOT that you can go, oh, yeah, no, how about this, how about that? But it meant that we had a common understanding of what foundation meant and where, and if the organization wanted to be sustainable within 3 to 5 years and all these elements, what's the journey plan to being there? So I think that's really important whenever you're giving people a framework to evolve or develop in. We have to recognize that we've got local communities in different places, and we want them to feel that they can join the journey and then plot how they get there.
So and thank you, Angela, that's great. And it helps align everybody and get behind it. Mm-hmm. So practical, having done that kind of work, what drops out of it? Again, coming back to talking about prospect and the back to part of that, and in particular within that particular plan, there was a need to get a focus on race and dealing with the issues sitting in that particular bucket of challenges, if you want. This was then their first foundation. This is their foundation approach in this first period of time, probably a year, 18 months. And again, they picked out, as it happened from their particular perspective and analysis of the need, 8 key areas that they felt were important to prioritize and to focus upon to create this initial foundation. And again, just to show you the level of detail that they're then going into is within each of those 8 areas, they've then got a fairly granular description. There's one of them, impact of BME voices, with a sort of a clearly stated overall aim that they want to have, and then some of the key action plans or objectives, if you want, that they've got within that. So that gives everybody a very clear kind of focus in terms of activity, what needs to be done within a given period of time. And again, as you can see, if you chunk right the way back up to the evolutionary map, and then indeed that overall aim, everyone's got a kind of a sense where they are in terms of making progress. So that's that component. And the other point, I suppose, to be made very clearly is that, we're thinking of this in terms of everybody gets to be involved. This is not just a plan that is run and delivered by people who are disadvantaged and discriminated against, not at all. It's a plan that everybody needs to be buying into and actually has got a significant role to play within that, which is why, again, the planning process really can be very beneficial if it's powerful. And to that extent, by the way, this is also an approach that, although leadership might well emanate from the top in terms of setting the scene, setting the behavioral examples, setting permission for the culture to change, it's executed by everyone's involvement on a daily basis. Yeah. And again, what we felt was important in this particular situation was to give everybody a common approach to change management. And so, as it happens, we built a fairly simple framework which we labeled Make It Happen. And again, anybody that has been involved in change management will recognize, the classic stages really of making sure that you begin by understanding the community that you're trying to assist in terms of understanding their experiences and needs in detail, and how you go about that, and then making sure that you win the permission, the willingness, the advocacy of people who can help make that plan come about, and focusing on making that happen. And then the business of how you create clarity around the challenges and organize yourself. And then finally, the ability to execute that in a certain style, in a way that creates momentum and also validates what's happening, gives people a sense of progress, etc. Nothing particularly new, but again, the detailed toolkit that sits behind of that is one that people get trained up in, and it allows people to then work in a common way. And that common way gives people a common language. It also allows them to swap best practice, to swap easily progress and reporting on that. And overall, the net effect is speeding up the rate of positive change and transformation. So,
sorry, Mark, before you move on,
please.
I think the other thing that's really vital is we talk about this being for everyone. So to include everyone, you may need to actually train and brief everyone. What do we mean by these 4 steps? And we actually did a survey up front to check with individuals how, how much you understood something, how confident you felt using it, have you done it already in your space? So we really did a proper fact find to make sure that when we're encouraging people to join the Make It Happen framework, they bought into the language, the process, and were able to express, oh, I need more coaching on this, Angela, or how about that? What do you mean by winning hearts and minds? And is gaining commitment just not enough to send an email? No, it's X, Y, Z. So I really think that the care about how you include people to participate in the framework is as important as the doing of the process, because then it will be taken alive.
Well said. No, I absolutely agree. So we've covered quite a lot there. So let me just go back quickly, talking about everybody needs to be involved in terms of making it happen. It's a very personal thing. You're also developing your scene setting, you're setting standards as a leader. You're then also producing an approach that affects every component of an organization culture, because that's the level at which change takes place, and the associated daily practices, setting a vision which is clear and unequivocal, mapping the journey in a way that reduces it to practice that people can understand at the end of the day, and then again drilling it down into action plans, and then giving them a toolkit for that kind of change. So that's our first section. Everybody see that now, daily leadership? Yep, great. Okay. Angela, your section, would you love to take us through some of the thought process around this?
Yes. So now back to the individual. Inclusion is personal. And this to me is so important that we remind ourselves that on one hand, we've got the organization and systems, and nowadays more people are having recognition calendars of key celebration moments, whether we've just done LGBTQ in February, sorry, and I think we've got Women's Day coming up, International Women's Day coming up next week. I think in the States it was the Black Lives Matter month, so we're doing things in the more, organizations are making attempts to recognize and involve different communities, different representations, different characteristics, and colleagues. I'd like to bring this to the attention that how do I show up and how do I feel like I belong? So, which speaks to how do I feel included? And it is in those everyday behaviors and those personal conversations and contacts that I have with my peers, my teammates, my colleagues, right from the moment someone comes in the room. Who do they say good morning to? How warm is the good morning to certain people versus other people? What are my colleagues doing? How they're getting me involved or not involved? All of these small interactions, moment by moment conversations, is where we create that relationships. And that's where when we say we've got an inclusive culture or an inclusive environment, people either feel bought in or on the outside. Do you want to move me on?
There we go.
So leaders being empathetic, and how you show your curiousness and your interest in others is one of the key ways in which you can show up to connect to people who are outside of you, who are different to you, to people that you may not even agree with, how do you create the space when they've got different behaviors and ways of working to you? How can you create that empathy? Because otherwise we end up round the table or asking the same people the same questions. We've got this chap here, Corey Anthony, you can look him up. In the States, they have a DEI, because they do DEI index as to how inclusive organisations are not. We don't have one in the UK as yet, but you can look to see, what does inclusion mean? How do you show up as a leader? How do you create opportunities that brings everyone around the table and not the familiar right-hand person that you normally speak to? Thank you. Here's a great one from Michelle Murphy, talking about adjusting our communications style. You know, and this is so important. How do we create the space or the environment that people feel relaxed, okay, it's safe to be me, that it's okay to take some risks, to say what I think, to bring my point of view in. She really talks about avoiding blame and how to create spaces where we can agree and disagree with respect. How do we flex our approach and our behavior? How do you as leaders set up the agenda or the meeting format so that everyone will have an opportunity to participate? So that's a good one for Michelle. You can look that one up. And moving beyond creating empathy, here are a few characteristics. This is a bit of research from Deloitte, and they've just pulled out 6 key behaviors as influencers, as folk in that area, leaders, that we can take some focus on. Curiosity, I just mentioned. How receptive are we to others? How do we collaborate? How do we do it when we're starting something? I just had a meeting before this conversation and somebody went, oh, Angela, if we'd only brought you in earlier, we would have realized A, B, C, D. And, you know, they recognized very quickly and apologized to me, saying, oh gosh, we got the same old people around the table, and next time we'll make sure we've brought you in earlier in the day. And this is what collaboration is about, is looking from the outset, how do we bring diverse thinking in? How do we build something that builds us something greater than where we are already? How do we show courage? How do we acknowledge our own imperfections? How do we create space to bring people along, help them to feel brave? How do we acknowledge that this is a risk taking and it may work, it may not? If we want a learning organization, if we want to facilitate people to grow and try different ways of showing up, how do we make it safe for them to learn and move forward with? So I think Aaron and Philip, you mentioned about bias and awareness of bias, you know, and to some extent bias is useful because it allows us to make certain types of decisions, but when it starts to exclude and not allow folk in, or not allow different ways of thinking in, then it becomes problematic and restrictive. So it's being conscious how it shows up as a leader. Do we always go to the same superheroes to resolve things? Do we always depend on certain folk who will stand by and do extra hours? You know, what do we do as leaders, unconsciously or consciously? And commitment, I love commitment, because this is the long game and there's no end in sight, because in the rich variety that's your team, your organization, you'll always be learning. In every conversation, we'll be growing, changing and adapting, whether it's people from different educational backgrounds, faith, religion, different types of foods we like to eat, all sorts of things. But it's your ongoing commitment to staying open and checking out with others where they're at and asking questions so that you can know how to better show up.
So I don't know that this is necessarily the definitive list, but I think it's a great example of saying that, you know, managers and leaders obviously need to have a chance to evolve their own management and leadership presence and approach to life. And I think that any of us that have got a sort of L&D background or love designing learning processes and experiences for other people will go, yes, this looks fun. You know, some of it you can do in traditional training mode. Some of it is just open discussion. Some of it is sort of action learning based stuff. And goodness me, this is a challenging list. This is not something you do in half a weekend. You know, it's something you do over a sustained period of time. But it would be wonderful to think that, you know, you are making sustained progress from exec downwards in terms of cultivating, you know, these new competencies, because they will undoubtedly influence and open up the space around of allowing diversity to happen and encouraging people to feel more included. So you know, the point of us including this is to say you definitely need to think about how you invest in the current generation and the future generation of people you want. This is in addition to the standard stuff, governance, performance management, whatever. This is the stuff that helps drive this particular program. So again, what are you doing? What's your 6 or dozen or whatever key characteristics and competencies that you want? And how are you going to bring those to life and sustain it over time? That's again a key part of your program.
And I would say, Martin, that's also how we create that win-win philosophy of being inclusive for everyone. So yes. Particularly where you feel, oh, I've got a large population who don't feel this is relevant to me or a priority at this time, there are ways in which they want to feel greater inclusion. There are ways they want to be involved. And this is something that you can get the conversation going with.
Now, by the way, I've just been triggered by, I said to Angela before we put this slide together, that actually somebody in the recent discussion had gotten upset with the notion of allyship. And I'm just wondering if it was actually one of us in last Friday's conversation. I'm not sure. And I'm sure we've got good reasons for all of that. So we've counterbalanced allyship with the more traditional notion of mentoring. And saying really, however you think about it, at the end of the day, it's making your own expertise and privilege available to other people to benefit from and to develop themselves so that their ambitions can get realized at the end of the day. Key point. Sorry, Ange, go back to your thing.
No, it's quite all right, Mart. So I would say from the moment I left school and where I am in my life, in where I am in my career, my working career, I have had so many allies who whipped me up. I remember leaving uni, thinking I want ABCD, and people going, Angela, come on over here, looking out for me. So I had senior leaders, peers, and allies who encouraged me, challenged me, demanded of me. So that helped set the tone right from an early start. It helped set the tone that that my aspirations could go somewhere, and not only my aspirations, but they wanted me to do X, Y, Z to deliver on organizational objectives, programs, and challenges. And so that ongoing thing of providing, yes, you can do it. Why not try this? Have you thought about that? These are small ways, but very powerful ways that every single person in your team, in your organization can do today, tomorrow, the next day, the following day. You know, it's acknowledging when things work, it's pointing out things that they could improve on, or it's, you know, I have WhatsApp groups who send me, oh, Angela, this is going on, would you like to get involved? Or I heard you were doing X, how about this? And this is something, again, for the wider community, that everybody in the organization can start showing up and being a buddy. And quite a lot of us do it instinctively, but how much can you use that privilege that Martin said? How much can you use your platform from where you are to help someone on their way? So allyship is totally powerful, and it's more than, you know, I don't know, we've got the symbols of change where people have taken the knee or stood up for somebody. It's doing it every day. And, you know, it's quite interesting, Jude, you were talking about the sexual harassment training you've been doing. Many organize, was it you?
Yes.
Yeah, it was not so much harassment. There's stuff about violence against women that I'm doing and misogyny. So yeah, you're in the right park. Yeah.
Okay, good. So with Prospect, when we started working with them, they were keen to show that they were systemically taking a lot of all their colleagues and managers through a process of understanding it, how to spot things, how to respond to things, what would happen if somebody called something out, all of those ways in which they would be supported if they took a stance, and what would happen next. And these are ways in which we as leaders can make that path be known as well as to be supported. So having a voice, letting people know the process is one thing, but giving that, and we ran very small conversational groups to allow people to communicate where they were at with things and what else they needed to know to feel confident to do things differently. So that's allyship and mentoring. Here's a couple of examples from our NHS colleagues, and they've looked at some really good examples of how do they draw upon the lived experiences of colleagues in their networks. And I think, Patrick, you were speaking to me yesterday about how important the lived experience of the people in your teams that you're looking at is taken in the journey of developing a way forward, and that we balance that with what the organisation wants to set as a North Star with how does that show up for our different communities, and what are the actual nuances, the things that matter more to one group versus other groups. So what's important for the priorities for a BAME group versus a women's group versus an LGBTQ and trans group. All of these may have a lot of commonalities, but they will still be different things that are important to people.
That's correct.
Great.
So I think, again, the point being is, I think that providing this is also supported with enterprise organizational wide structured change, these organizations, these groups can really flourish. If they are simply the only symbol of a diversity and inclusion approach, I think that they wave flags, but they don't have the power to tackle some of the deeper systemic stuff. So again, they're important, but they are only part of that solution. And again, they can be very active. And I think this one again is actually from the NHS, which was part of an award that they entered, showing how they'd organised themselves, and indeed, the degree to which they're busy and organised. And I think from the theme that we've got going on today about leadership and management, then very practically speaking, as Angela was talking about with allyship, I can join in that way and use my opportunity of privilege to help people. I can also be promoting these kinds of calendar of events and also be personally involved, and to show up, that makes a difference at the end of the day, and being involved and making sure that my participation represents, some indication of the organization caring and the impact that can have on those particular groups. Never underestimate that particular thing either. And then, of course, we get to the point of saying, so, how do you actually know if you're making any progress on this stuff? There's a number of ways of doing it, one of which is this, which is nice because it's simple. And thinking about it, there's a personal dimension of experience. Am I feeling encouraged to be myself, speak up, feeling connected, feel the work I'm doing is meaningful and valued? And then that gets amplified and extended to an enterprise perspective. So again, you can see, the broader view of, yes, all employees feel valued, we're embracing it. We all have strong bonds working together. We all feel that things are equitable and have a fair chance to succeed. And again, it's a nice, simple framework. It's a nice, simple way in which you can poll people. You can get into deeper conversations to get qualitative insight. And again, against that framework that we talked about earlier on, the evolutionary model, it's another way of sensing, are we getting anywhere? And then there's more formal ways. And do you want to say something about these ones? Because I think these are equally important, aren't they?
Yeah. So tracking the numbers, evidence and data. Lots of people want to know how many, what does it make a difference, what's vital, what's important here. So on the left, or my left anyway, we've got that sort of little tunnel, the pipeline diagram there, and that's really showing how at entry level we've got that representation between men, women of colour, men of colour, and how does that show up as people move through the organisation into the senior C-suite kind of roles. So whilst we can see the, you know, how it drops off and what are the points of which people were encouraged, and so, you know, in many spaces I'm a novelty, being a businesswoman, and you know, I'm in that 4% most often, because that, you know, the pipeline to bringing people through and keeping them isn't there. And we've got some other ways of showing, I think you said it was Salesforce was the,
yeah, this is a global perspective from Salesforce. Yeah, that's right.
From showing both gender and ethnicity, and again with the ethnicity, so important to pull out what's Asian, what's Indian, what's African, what's Spanish, what's Caribbean, what do we mean by Black. You know, all of these nuances help us to tease out what's important. I'm doing a program between Liverpool and London, and we're talking about widening participation. 2 different cities with different communities in the same organisation, but how does inclusion and equality and equity turn up? Very different, very different processes. And with regard to that, this is where, as when you've got EDI programs, you can create, it's an umbrella program. It's a way of bringing different groups, different sites under one umbrella to say, we want to do better in this area. This is how it shows up for us when we're talking about better.
And it's a small point, by the way, but if you've ever worked with Salesforce or that kind of technology and reporting, you know, the great thing about it is you can drill down into it. So the ability to chunk up and to chunk down into the data, as Angela says, to understand local stories in terms of geographies, in terms of particular groups, what's going on there, but also to be able to see the overview. That's incredibly important, you know, not to be able to just have your numbers sticking in a spreadsheet, which is very difficult to do anything with that. The more flexible you can make that data, the more useful you can start to pinpoint areas of over and underperformance around of your objectives, you know, on EDI. That's one way of looking at it. The other way is, of course, there are just ways to know whether things are working or not. And these are just 3 stories, which again, I think are nice ones, because this is the way that certain, you know, evangelists who are fairly well known in the space have done it. So Fiona says, you know, guess what? Attrition, it doesn't lie. If people are leaving the business having recruited them, that for me is quote unquote the canary in the coal mine. It just tells you that things are not the way that you're hoping they are, and people just don't feel it's the place that they can continue to be at. So for her, that's absolutely something that she is focused upon, she understands.
Sorry, and just on that right now, we're talking about the Great Resignation, the revolving doors. You know, people are not willing to stay with organisations that doesn't recognise who they are, their contribution, and what they want out of the organisation. So balancing back that relationship is vital. And also, lots of people have spent money on diversity and are not retaining the very numbers that they've been chasing to get, because the environment that the people have joined isn't sustaining those values, isn't sustaining the recruitment advert, you know, so that is equally important.
The second one is interesting because DHL and possibly the territory itself, you know, women still remain underrepresented in technology. So for her, the key point is how far up the organizational ladder have women climbed, and therefore she looks at it from the point of view of the CEO downwards. How well is that advance happening or not? And that's what she tends to track. And then Damien's got a really interesting one, actually, which I think is, you know, again, another way of looking at this. This is from Zoom's perspective, which is, you know, within these groups that we have, the employee resource groups, have we got others that are turning up there? Have we got a rich tapestry of allyship spreading out there? Because that's another indication of you know, the diversity of thought that comes into those groups, and other people listening and understanding the stories and contributing to those narratives. So those are other elements as well. So that's kind of really the second part, which is the, if you want, the day-to-day leadership, as we talked about. And again, time is always marching on, so we've got ourselves a little bit of time to just reflect on that second section. And I suppose what we've talked about here overall is there's lots that can be done to bring the challenge of day-to-day leadership to light, to encourage people, to help them evolve personally, and also to show where it matters in terms of leadership responsibilities. And so really, again, over to you to hopefully reflect on some of that.